And I'll tell you why. Because if you listen to anyone else in the media other than me and Tom Woods, who you'll hear from later on today, when you hear the word nullification, you almost are always going to hear whose name come next.
John C. Calhoun.
Thank you! Give that man. Who said that? John C. Calhoun. Oh, Calhoun! Now we can bring plantations and slave ships and plantations and slave ships and plantations and slave ships and... I digress. You get the picture from watching MSNBC. Nullification equals slavery. This is the charge. This is beyond preposterous. All Calhoun did was parrot, being a good student of history, his educational masters, Jefferson, Madison, and yes, Taylor of Caroline. And that's where the final part of the story leads us to John Taylor of Caroline County. But first, let's set the timeline up for the remainder of the big events that will lead to December 1798. On the 21st of June, 1798, Jefferson writes his last letter of the summer to James Madison explaining what is going on inside the Adams administration. Jefferson warns Madison of a gathering in Congress, I'm going to quote some here, of war hawks. Gee, where have I heard that before? Who are, quote, to keep up the inflammation of the public mind, end quote. Jefferson mentions the trouble brewing at the newspaper run by Benjamin Franklin's grandson, Benjamin Franklin Bash. Bash, ironically, will be one of the first men to be thrown in jail under the Alien and Sedition Acts. True story. Bear in mind that Jefferson is currently presiding over the United States Senate as Vice President of the United States. Not the Rotary Club. President of the U.S. In other words, he is an officer of the Adams administration. And he's doing what? We're accused of being seditious here. They're writing a Sedition Act. What's Jefferson doing? He's the Vice President, for crying out loud. To put Madison in, to finish that little story up, so this is the last letter that Jefferson will write to Madison for the remainder of the year, that is 1798, save for one that he writes in December. Now to put that in perspective, heretofore, on the 21st of June, 1798, TJ has written 21 letters to James Madison, and that's an average year. You can go back and look at the correspondence between the two. They were pen pals, they were buddies. 21 letters, this is the last one in June of 1798. Why? Because they knew their mail was being opened. They did not trust the post. Jefferson and Madison would then get into the practice of exchanging ciphers every summer. Codes that still to this day, researchers at Princeton University can't crack. They can't crack, I'm serious, they can't crack the codes, the ciphers. They don't know how to crack them. So they either didn't write letters or they wrote in code, cipher. So we don't hear any more between TJ and Madison. To use the term, or a military term, Bill, you'll know this, radio silence is an understatement of the millennia. As a matter of fact, Jefferson doesn't write to anyone for the rest of the summer unless he has to execute the duty of vice president. It's the only correspondence he has. Somebody sends him a letter and says, we need your opinion on this, Mr. Vice President. He responds. Now on the 26th of November, 1798, silence is broken when Jefferson writes to John Taylor. And as we shall see, that letter is ominous. In a little docudrama that I produced called What Lincoln Killed, Episode 1, I stitched together what I think could have happened in the fateful summer of 1798 between our three heroes. Though we will never know the truth because they destroyed all their correspondence. There's nothing, there's no paper trail. Nothing to find. So knowing that the mail was being monitored, that printers and citizens were being locked up for challenging the Alien and Sedition Acts, the men met in secret, probably in July and August, to lay out their plan. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions for nullification and interposition. We now know that Jefferson would write the Kentucky version, and Madison the Virginia version. While all this was going on, the people in Kentucky were getting busy too. Remember, it's Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. So in Kentucky, just as we saw in Fredericksburg, there were town hall meetings galore. Resolves were produced in several counties, including the largest county, Clark County. A meeting on August the 13th in Lexington, Kentucky, is said to have been attended by thousands who wished their legislature to take their resolves to the assembly and, quote, give such solemnity to the voice of the people as will arrest the attention of our infatuated rulers, end quote. So in Kentucky, they did the same thing that the Virginians in Fredericksburg did. They told their legislature, do something about it. And they also wrote to their member of Congress. Of course, Congress was not in session in those days, because back then, Congress would and end in the same season. Imagine that. We start on the 21st of March and end on the 20th of June. Sometime in early October, Jefferson writes 2 drafts of what we know today as his Kentucky Resolves. And in the 8th resolve of the 2nd draft, we find the reason for this meeting today, or at least the name. Section 8, resolved, quote, that Kentucky considers union for specified national purposes, and particularly for those specified in their late federal compact, to be friendly to the peace, happiness, and prosperity of all the states. That it does also believe that to take from the states all the powers of self-government and transfer them to a general and consolidated government without regard to the special delegations and reservations solemnly agreed to in that compact, is not for the peace, happiness, or prosperity of these states, and that therefore this Commonwealth is determined, as it doubts not its co-states are, to submit to an undelegated and consequently unlimited powers in no man or body of men on earth. That in the cases of an abuse of the delegated powers, the members of the general government being chosen by the people, a change by the people would be the constitutional remedy. But where powers are assumed which have not been delegated, a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy. That every state has a natural right, in cases not within the compact, to nullify of their own authority all assumptions of power by others within their limits. That without this right, they would be under the dominion, absolute and unlimited, of whosoever might exercise this right of judgment for them. End quote. On the 10th of November 1798, the Kentucky Assembly does, in fact, adopt these resolves. But not until they have added their own language, and unfortunately for us, subtracted some as well. Notably missing from the 8th resolve, or actually it becomes the 10th resolve, in the Kentucky official version is the word nullification or nullify. The Kentucky resolves instead opted for a request to the other states of the Union to, quote, recur to their natural right in cases not made federal, will concur in declaring these acts void and of no force, and will each unite with this Commonwealth in requesting their repeal at the next session of Congress, end quote. Now this has been seized upon by the Mark Levins of the world and others as some kind of proof that Jefferson never meant to use the term nullify, which amounts to a semantical argument, folks, because the legal statement made is identical. The unconstitutional laws are, quote, void and of no force, end quote. It doesn't matter what you call it. You could call it turnification. It wouldn't matter. Tomatofication. It's irrelevant. It's the preamble. It's what the act is called. The actual legislative act and the legal force of nullification or tomatofication is void and of no force. That's the operative part of the law. So, we hear this often, well, Jefferson never meant to. Well, we'll never know because his correspondence is destroyed. There's no correspondence. We don't know what he did all summer long.